Well, good morning, everybody. It is straight up 10:30 according to my computer and my phone. So in respect for your time, we are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Tiffany Hafer. I am an instructional designer within Distance Learning, which is a division of the Center for Teaching Excellence. And I appreciate everyone's time today being here for aligning content and learning objectives. And our goal is to improve student learning success. So a few little housekeeping things first. There is a link that I will give you later. Kind of depends on how many people end up coming in. We're at that spot where I do think we're going to have to do the one activity in a breakout room. But I will also, I don't ever want anybody to feel like they have to write down these horrible Google Drive URLs. I will send you every resource, some we don't even see today, either Monday or Tuesday, so you will have everything. I do ask that you will remain muted unless you're speaking to the group, which we may do, so we will talk about that. And knock on wood, we haven't been Zoom bombed yet, but if we do, just the standard, turn off your video, mute yourself if you're talking. If you are in the breakout rooms, please come back to the main room. While all that is going on, I will be trying to boot the person out, but I will give you further instruction. If for some reason I wouldn't be able to boot the person out, we might have to end the session, but hopefully not. So let's get started. So instructional alignment, you know, we talk about it in so many ways, how it helps with students, how it helps us meet quality matters. But so today I'm just going to try to give us some background in how to do it, and we'll do some minor activities, a few polls, and then you'll be able to apply it later, and we'll talk about next steps near the end. But content, activities, and assessments, they are way more than just drilling and testing a student to try to come up with a grade. All of these things should fit together so that they make up a system that provides feedback about what the students learn, how they're learning, where they can improve, help them focus. So one approach that I'm going to use today and that I urge you to consider is using Bloom's to improve student learning. I am going to use the revised because it's revised and it's actually a little easier, it's a little more succinct, and I think it works a little better. You can do this by using any taxonomy, so don't feel like I'm forcing you to use Bloom's or that we're going to have a long boring class on Bloom's, because we're not. We're just going to kind of touch on it and talk about how to implement it. So having said that, we need to be able to write observable learning objectives. And we're going to do that together. And then we want to choose the supportive, formative content for those learning objectives. And then ultimately choose assessments that accurately assess the content that we taught. And then that all ultimately leads to everything being aligned back to those learning objectives. And when activities and assessments are lined up with the ultimate objectives, that's what we call alignment. So we are going to do a little poll. It's an opportunity for you to tell me what you really think about learning objectives. It's anonymous, so you can choose any of the options, and I've launched it, so hopefully you should be able to see it. And this is just your feeling about learning objectives. I know, some people love them, some people hate them, and I already got people being totally honest. I love that. So I will give you all a few moments so we get a fair amount of participation. I'm going to show you results. So some of you say you pull it directly from the textbook, and I don't see anything wrong with that as long as you're reviewing them, because obviously somebody put a lot of time and effort into writing them, and I am a firm believer in not reinventing the wheel. So if they're appropriate, you like them, I say that's fine. And great news is that most of you do use them to guide your course, so thank you very much. I appreciate that some people think they're pointless, because let's all be honest, students rarely read them or care about them. And I've got a couple of necessary evils. So thank you guys. So back to objectives and alignment. Alignment is the connection between those objectives, the activities, and the assessment. And an aligned course does mean that all of those things match up and students learn what you intend. And that means that you can accurately assess what they're learning. If objectives are an expectation about their performance, then we need to be able to verbalize that. And we want to verbalize it in a way that shows what we want the student to be able to actually do or know or be able to show when they finish the course. And if the objectives are written in ways that clearly state what they're going to learn or what they're going to do, and in a perfect world written in student voice, then we've set the stage for their success. Good objectives can be referred back to through activities and assessments, and it helps show the student, you know, how what they're doing supports them for success, as opposed to, why am I doing this? You know, I'm never going to use this, or is this going to be on the test? And you teach stuff and you don't test me stuff. So that's kind of those things that we're going to kind of touch on. And again, it's showing that learning path. And so then students hopefully will become more aware of their own learning and have the ability to control it, monitor it, regulate it, which is what Mary Helen talked to you about earlier, I believe. That's that whole metacognitive piece. So the activities themselves, hopefully they're engaging, and we want them to engage the student and help them achieve that intended objective. And so as I was saying, you know, you hear them complain that the content doesn't prepare them for a test, or the test didn't test what we talked about in class, you know, all of that litany of complaints. So activities that clearly model the goal. A student learns pretty early on that you are doing what you say you're going to do, and they're expected to do what you told them they were going to be expected to do. So that builds confidence in the whole process and in your entire course. So it engages them because they can see the purpose. And I understand we have a huge demographic here at the college. So sometimes you get learners or students who are more driven because they can see the purpose of the goal, and some that aren't. But if we can at least reach that point, you know, that does help drive home the purpose of everything. And if those activities are truly formative in nature and they're aligned, then if nothing else, we are providing the student the tools they need to be successful. And when we get to those more high stakes summative assessment portions. And then the assessment, you know, we know that it's a system for collecting evidence about their learning, and but it involves so much of your time, you know, too. You need to observe, record, score, interpret all that information and collect it. And a good system of assessment also provides feedback to the student about their learning. And it provides feedback to you because, you know, that's going to show you that, you know, you're on the right path in helping them. And it supports your judgment on grading. It really gives you the solid argument about the grade you issued. And aligned assessments measure what we told them and how we told them. And so it also improves their chances, again, for success at that point, because we've given them everything relative and formative, and we're measuring what we said we would. And so, and again, we're measuring what we taught, which is even more important. So when learning activities relate directly back, it's easier to hit all the targets, your targets, their targets. You know, if they aren't aligned, what we run into is that your course could have a fragmented feel. It might be ineffective. Students then do receive those mixed messages about what they should learn or where they should focus their time. Because they might be, if it's not aligned, they might be spending time on things that don't lead to the intended goal. And that can lead to an overestimation or an underestimation of the effectiveness of what we're teaching. So I hope that we all think that alignment is important or at least valid, but how do you do it? And one way is that we're going to use that learning taxonomy. And we'll get into some different things. I'll show you how to plot things on a grid, and it kind of helps you find your path in this process, but we will get to that a little bit later. But the taxonomy's purpose is to help you classify your course learning objectives, and then your selected learning activities and assessments. You can use that to see if they're all aligned. And there's a bunch of them, like I said. The revised Bloom's is probably the most commonly used, and we're going to touch on it. But just remember that more than anything, when they revised it, they kind of created the visual where it was easier to see that it moved from simple to complex and concrete to abstract. So this is the quick recap. I promise we're not going to spend a ton of time on it, but the wording in the pyramid is slightly different from the original. And this version is a little more useful for planning and for instruction and assessment. And I think most of you probably have this, but I will send it to you in the packet that I send out early next week. So we are going to focus on the learning objective piece for a few minutes. So I want you to think about how every program of instruction, a course or even a training activity, it should begin with a goal. And the goal can be broken down into specific goals, breaking it out to make it a little more targeted. And that's our learning objectives. And those should be concise statements about what students are going to be able to do when they complete whatever the thing is. And so they guide the choices. They should be well defined and articulated, and they're important because, again, they're providing that clear purpose to help focus and direct student learning, your choices for activities, and guiding your assessment strategy. Most of you know this, but once in a while, people will get confused about the difference between a learning goal and a learning objective, so I just want to touch on it briefly. And that's that the goal is what you hope to accomplish in the course. And the overall goal, it doesn't necessarily result in a product of observable or measurable behavior, whereas the objectives are those brief, clear statements about what students will be able to do. And then measurable means something objective, like define, identify, defend, compare. We want to avoid verbs that are hard to assess, like understand, know, become familiar with, those types of things. And course level objectives really need to have one verb, because more than one can muddy our waters. Because what happens is the student can master the objective or they can fail it. But if the objective has two verbs, like define and apply, or the big one that we all have been subjected to, and that we do inadvertently because it feels natural, compare and contrast. So what happens if they compare, but they don't contrast? They never want to contrast for some reason. A common one, is that. So if they do one but the other, don't do the other, have they met the learning objective? I know it feels like then if you split it out that the objective list gets really long, but at least it's clear and it's concise, and it will be better if you can split it. And then course level objective verb equal to the highest supporting lesson objective. That seems wordy and weird, but basically we want to ensure that the verbs in the course level objectives, those ones that we put either in D2L or on the syllabus, on that first bit, that they're at least at the highest taxonomy as the highest lesson level. So that's what I'm saying, highest to highest, because that's how you support it. Because we can't say that they can evaluate something if our lessons only taught them or assess them to define something. And that means you might change the objective, and that's fine. or you might change the content. It depends on what you need to do and what you want to do. So sometimes this is easier said than done. It's like everything we do in life. But the most important and challenging aspect of good learning objectives is defining that behavior in a way that's observable and it's easy to measure. Like I said earlier, learning and understanding, familiarizing, those are all great things, but how do you truly assess it? You know, student can say, I know that, I just bombed the test, or I went out and looked at all the stuff you told me to look at, so I familiarized myself with it, but I can't tell you a darn thing about it. So if you can't measure it in a way that makes sense, then, you know, we need to have students do things like organize, label, explain, create, those types of things. So we are going to do the breakouts. I will, in the chat window, put the link, but I'm also going to show you what this Google Doc is going to look like when you get into it. And there's only 14, I think. I think the participant window counts themselves, so there's not a ton of us. So we'll just, to make it easy, break you out into 3 groups, 2 groups. And but if you will look at what's on the screen, when you click on the link, it's going to take you to this Google Sheet, and that first page just says, please look at the bottom. And there's groups 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Obviously, there's not going to be 5 groups. But what I want you to do is whatever group number Zoom assigns to you, just click on that tab. That's your group. And then I'm actually going to go ahead and pull up the document so that you can see it. And so and I promise nobody's getting better or worse ones. They're all the same on each tab. So just do the best you can to. This is obviously not high stakes. This is for you guys to kind of get your hands dirty. Obviously, the first one is the easiest one, so it's the one I did as an example. Boo hiss on me. But the idea is in the first column, we see a learning objective in its before status. And this one was understand immigration policy. And so what I want you to do is a quick, not anything too massive, just what's the problem? So in this one, understand's not measurable. And then after, try to write something, even if you just write the first part, like, you know, explain immigration, ... You know, don't feel like you've got to create this beautiful product. I just want you to get a feel for it. And then we'll go over them. We'll come back to the room and, you know, I'll hop between the 2 tabs so that no one gets all the focus. And I will tell you, one of them is one that I argue isn't terrible, but some of the experts say that there is something that can make it better. And so if somebody looks at one of these and says, I don't see anything wrong with it, I may buy that. So you guys just do, let me copy this stink for you. I'm going to put it in the chat window. And I will tell you that once you go out into the breakout room, if you might still have to have your chat window open to be able to see the link if you don't click on it right now to have it open. And I will pop into a couple of the rooms. Well, there's only going to be 2 of you, but I will pop into a room to make sure nobody's having any trouble. And there are 14 of you. All right, we'll do 3 rooms. That way, just y'all aren't shouting over each other if you need to. I've opened all the rooms, and you'll be asked to go. So it's down at the bottom, kind of in the middle of your screen. You can go join that way, and I will send out a notice saying when it's time to come back. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you all being so active out there, and we're just going to touch on these quick. Y'all can all hear me now? So we'll just start with group 1, and we'll do the first one, and we'll pop through. Describe and create a marketing plan, and you guys nailed it. It had 2 verbs, which made it 2 objectives in 1. And so, yes, I would split them out. Create a marketing plan for the organization. And if you want it, and if you felt that by creating one that negated the need to describe, we could, or we can make 2. Become familiar with elements of editing. Yes, it's very vague. How do you measure familiarity without, in a way that's really objective? So maybe, yes, they could edit something. They could apply. They could even, I do like the idea that you guys thought, yeah, that's kind of performance-based. They need to show it. But, depending on the level, how early in the course, maybe they just list or define. Complete the assignment. Absolutely. What assignment? What's going on? We don't know. So, yes, we would want them to do something more definitive than that. So explain the benefits of various exercise modalities. This was the tricky one that I said, yes, explain is a decent enough verb in my book. When I was preparing for this and trying to look for different ones for different disciplines, this one came up, and an author indicated that they thought that this wasn't student-centered enough, that you're more likely to explain these things, and then they should be able to do something with it. Like you said, list it, apply it, something like that. If it were just me reviewing it, even on like a Quality Matters external review, I would let that go, to be fair. So I like to throw that one in as just a little trick, because that just shows that there can be disagreement too. And then formulate a management for each of the above. I think that one, what we're thinking there is, it was obviously meant to be one in a list of 2 or 5 or something, but they should stand alone. So I would hope that we could change it to something like formulate a management for patient assessment or something along those lines, depending on whatever the discipline might be. So very good, guys. Thank you so much. And I know a lot of times we take a break after the activity, but we'll take a break in a little bit. I try to do it a little more mid, so we'll get there. And I know that we're online and everybody's grown, and if you need to run to the bathroom, you do, but I also feel like it can all take a breath and step away at a little bit later point. So this chart or table, I know you're like, well, that's real pretty. What good does that do me? And so I'm going to show you how to use something like this to plot your course. And you will be incorporating a taxonomy, and we're going to use revised Bloom's to do it today. And so what this little table does is it combines the original levels of learning, which are across the top, remember to create, with types of knowledge down on the left, factual all the way down to the metacognitive. And so we talked about aligning helps students achieve those goals. And so we want to be able to match stuff up. And this is how we're going to do it today. And I'm hoping that this will help you approach your course systematically and effectively, and kind of focus your efforts on those learning objectives, and then select the appropriate assessments that correspond. So I'm going to break this thing down just because I feel like it's just a whole lot of orange right there in your face. So the cognitive process dimension reflects Bloom's categories or levels of learning, and they do go from simple to complex. So the first one's remember, which, we want them to recognize or recall something, a fact or a concept. But then when they go to understand, we want them to construct some meaning from it. So while understand is not a good learning objective verb, it is part of how we want their knowledge dimension to grow. Apply, they're going to use then what they remembered and then understood to, they're going to use those ideas and concepts to solve some sort of problem. And then hopefully at some point we'll get them up to analyzation, and they're going to take that something and they're going to break it down into components and see the relationship and the overall structure. Then at some point they would move into evaluation, and so they're going to make judgments based on criteria or standards. And then the highest one is create. They're going to take some diverse elements from within what you've taught them, and they're going to form a new pattern or structure. And then down this left-hand side, this is, again, a list of the types of knowledge in the knowledge dimension. And these categories range from concrete to abstract, but they don't necessarily mean that they become more complex. For example, like learning a procedure or skill does not require mastery of all related facts and concepts. And metacognitive knowledge can be done at any level of learning because it's just knowing how well you understand something where you are in the moment. So while this looks linear, you know, just know that this is really more about moving towards a more abstract versus necessary complexity. It doesn't mean that we can't do one or all of these at one time. And then, so it kind of helps to keep in mind the relationship between the knowledge dimension, such as factual, to the types that support, you know, support it better, such as basic elements about the subject or what the knowing is. So in the factual case, this means that the student knows that. They know that thing. They know something factual like a term, or maybe they understand vocabulary. Whereas in conceptual, it's the what and the why, and it means that they know the principles and the generalizations about it. The procedure dimension is the how to do it. That's where they're going to be able to perform a skill, show a method. They're going to know how, or they're going to be able to show you the how. And then the how to know, that's the metacognitive piece that we've been hearing a lot about. And so at this point, you know, if they're in the metacognitive piece, hopefully this means that they're aware of their own learning and that they have some ability to control it or monitor it or regulate that learning. So plotting the course on the table means that you find out where your learning objective goes and where your activities go and your assessments go, and you plot them out here. And this animation kind of shows what that can look like. And I'll warn you, it moves kind of fast. Also, initially, you're just going to see a bunch where, and I'll talk about this again, where they're aligned because they're all in the same cell. And yes, if they're all in the same cell, you definitely have it all in alignment. But there are times when we will talk about when it might not. And, you know, if you're brand new at doing it, I might not suggest that one. It's a little harder. But like this one, they're saying the objective is way up on apply, and we didn't assess or any of that. Same thing here. You know, we have these lofty goals. We were doing everything low, and then that one's aligned. And so again, this is an earlier animation, and I feel like in early days, especially if you're new to trying to write courses or write objectives, if we can get them all in the same box, you know we nailed it. But if not, there are times when they will not all align. So, and that's where we get into this kind of, it's simple in theory, but it is a little more difficult than it might appear. So to think about the plotting of each thing, you know, that requires some of that complex cognitive process thinking of your own. And this is what I was just talking about. And that maybe they're all on the same cloud or cell. And that's great, but maybe they don't or they shouldn't. And the more you do it, it does become easier. But, you know, sometimes we might have to push that activity off into a different cell. And see, I promised you a break. It's 11:11. Let's do till 11:20-ish. And just go take a break or get a breather. And I'll see you in just a few.
Hey, Tiffany, quick. So Rhonda had sent out a link for all of these things on Tuesday, and I clicked on that,
Mm-hmm.
and it brought me to June 24th. So when I clicked on it, it registered me for June 24th. I mean, I was already registered for this one, so I went back to my initial link
Sure.
in my emails and clicked on and got in here. But I just wanted you to realize that I am registered now for June 24th.
Okay, I'll let somebody know. It's really okay. The 24th one, that's the night one, and it's really for adjuncts or people who couldn't make it.
Okay. I'm just saying in case you may want to kick me out of that so that it can leave up space for
Space. I will. Thank you for letting me know.
Yep, no problem.
Oh, I'm an adjunct and I'm today.
I'm sorry?
I'm an adjunct and I'm in a session this morning.
That's fine. Y'all can go whenever's good for you. They
Thank
just
you.
wanted to make sure we had a night option for the people who needed it.
Thank you.
You're great. Thank you, guys. I'll see you in a few. All right, everybody. It's straight up 11:20, so we'll just get started again in respect for your time. We may get finished a little bit early. I try to do that when I can. So we're going to talk about this. This is kind of an overview of the plotting, and we're going to go into that into more detail. I'm not sure that I've got everybody back, but I'm going to wait one more minute. I did say ish. I shouldn't have said ish.
One of my favorite suffixes, ish.
I know, it just seems so more gentle.
Well, it lets you, deal with reality sometimes. Sometimes
Well,
you need
there's
an
that.
ish.
Absolutely. So wait till 11:21, because this is the part about plotting, which can be a little more, I don't know, detailed.
Tiffany, in the previous QEP, we did metacognition this was back like in 2008, 2009.
Mm-hmm.
And we did some workshops on Bloom's taxonomy back then,
Okay.
which was kind of helpful. But of course, that was, a number of years ago, and faculty have changed and disciplines
Absolutely.
have changed and the college has undergone reorganization. But I may have some things left over from that. I was the director, so that's why I've got some of that material.
I would say if you'd like to share it with me, that'd be great. And if you think that, another round of that would be good for some folks,
Yeah, well,
I know. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I think revisiting this in a concrete way, applying it to our specific courses and then our calendar of activities is always the challenge.
Right.
Abstractly, we can deal with all of those lovely charts and all of the multiple forms they come in. There's one from Iowa that's like 3D and gorgy and all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But then actually implementing it is something we need to be reminded about relatively frequently, I would say. So.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I will say that, as we all know, things are just so vague and unsure, at the moment. But I do know that we are trying to get some sort of calendar going. Worst case, things will continue to be, that's not worst case. I actually like doing these Zoom meetings to the effect that it's more accessible to a lot of people, and we do try to record stuff. So I will mention that to Mary Helen, though, that's not a bad, that it was brought up that maybe a revisit there wouldn't be a bad idea. So maybe we work that on the schedule, because I don't think anything's nailed down so hard right now that we don't have openings. And
I was just thinking about the verbs, like, we've got our 6 verbs across the top, but then, as you say, okay, we don't want to use remember per se, but we might want to use recall, we might want to use identify, so all of the different subcategories of that, and then what that implies for the assessment tool.
I will, when I send out the packet, I will say that I have a list in there, and I have one that even gives examples broken down by discipline. So those may be helpful, but any information you want to shoot back to me, I'm happy to disseminate as well. So, all right, guys. So we will start back. And like I said, this is kind of just a graphic to show us what we're going to do. And I am going to focus on this little part right at the first, because there are some natural associations to keep in mind. Some of those cognitive processes, fit with certain types of knowledge. And so let's think about what that means. The remember cognitive process does make total sense with the factual, whereas understand and conceptual, apply and procedural, if you're teaching in one of these dimensions, you should try to also assess its cognitive process. So other processes, the higher ones like analyze, evaluate, create, they're more general. And so if students are learning factual knowledge, you need to assess their ability to remember that knowledge. But if we're moving further beyond that and they, and we're doing different things, we want to assess within the associated process. And I'm going to show you more of these. And I'm also going to talk a lot about assessments and which part of the table works best and is most effective or used most often, and where maybe it's not the most effective, but if you're really good at it, it might be, kind of the grayer areas. We'll talk about all that. But also just a nod back to this metacognitive piece. As we know, it's the awareness of thinking and learning. And so it's important because it involves all the mental strategies we use to learn and to solve problems. And since it also deals with self-knowledge about our mental strengths and weaknesses and how we learn best, it's critical through the learning process. And so just discussing learning strategies with students and making it more visible is beneficial and constructive. So, that's why it's all the way across the bottom, from top to bottom. Hopefully they're applying some of this metacognitive knowledge across whatever they're learning. So then to speak to the higher end of this table, I always want to call it a chart. I guess it doesn't matter, but try to incorporate objectives, activities, and assessments for these more complex ones of analysis, evaluation, creation. These processes facilitate the retention of other processes. So, for example, having a student evaluate a procedure, it does facilitate their recall and their understanding, but it also we want to teach them to analyze a fact or concept and why they have the same effect. So those higher ones incorporate those more complex knowledge dimensions. And we're going to have another one of these little videos. And again, it moves kind of fast, but this one's not nearly as fast as the other one. We can use this table to plot those activities and assessments. And we mentioned earlier that when they're all in the same cell, that's great. Maybe they don't need to. So learning activities and sometimes assessment may be plotted kind of around the table, what looks like it's out of alignment. And the reason for that is sometimes in order to accomplish a particular learning objective, you need to incorporate activities from some of the other ones. And so we'll see what that looks like. So the objective is up here and analyze, but we've got activities on either side. I might, and I didn't create this animation, but definitely, in order to analyze something, they do need to be able to understand and apply. So maybe you've got some of that informative. I would argue, though, that evaluate needs to be in the analyze. Yes, can you sometimes evaluate, have an activity above it? Yeah, but I really wanted you to see more that lower activities don't necessarily mean we're not aligning, because it's all formative. So hopefully, we're building up to the objective, and I would argue that we would want at least one activity in that analyze phase. So this was a really messy, terrible idea of a slide initially. I had everything on one page. So what I'm going to tell you is that I wanted to break down a persuasive writing of a historical issue. You know, from the idea of what we want them to be able to do to the objective and what would be supportive and how would we plot it. So I hate to read to you, but I know it's kind of small. So the idea is that for the learning objective of explaining the effects of England's taxes on the colonists during a certain period, students are going to be asked to research facts and then write a persuasive editorial article from either view, whichever one they want to pick. So when we break that down, the objective would be plotted in the understand, because we want them to understand conceptual knowledge about which is the effects of England's taxes. So the objective written, and it could be written other ways, but a good one is explain the effects of England's taxes on American colonists during that period. And so the way that this could be done, you know, they've got activities where they remember things, they've got an objective, and then on this one, we've gone way up because we're wanting them to create. And again, this does work. And I like to show it so that everyone knows that, you know, everything you've always done isn't wrong. Everything, you know, I understand that you know the best way to support whatever it is they need to be able to do. And maybe they need to be able to create for this. You know, and you have to decide how you assess that, though, because these are just activities we're talking about at this point. But we are going to talk about assessments. And yeah, I just want to say straight out of the gate that no single type can provide a complete picture of learning, but choosing the right type or the right combination does give us a more accurate measurement of things. And we're going to review some of the general concepts around assessments, and then we're going to look at these 4 types. And the ones I do want to look at are objective tests, essays, concept maps, projects, and performances. And I'm going to talk to you about the way that, you know, essays don't necessarily have to be what we always think they are. We are going to do one more quick poll, guys. I know sometimes it's a hassle. This one will take you a little second longer to read. I'm going to give you a learning objective. I've even explained what I think the verb is supported by, and I want you to pick which assessment you think is most appropriate. So it'll take you a little bit longer than the other just because you got to read and think a little bit harder, because it's not just your opinion. But again, if we don't all get the same answer, it's okay. We'll talk about all of that. All right, that's all, literally almost everybody. So I'm going to share the results and take my little picture, because that's what I do. So we're all, so almost everybody picked multiple choice question to choose correct date for the Battle of Bull Run. And then we got a short answer quiz and then a 1-page essay, and we all knew that wasn't it. So I do agree with everyone that multiple choice is probably the best one, but and short answer quiz, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's wrong if we want them to remember or recall. But if you read it fully, I did say about why the Battle of Bull Run was important, which we just were wanting them to remember important dates, not necessarily the importance of the battle. And I could certainly see where that could be confusing. So good job. And then this was just a little doodad. So in furtherment of assessment types, I know that you all understand formative and summative, but with my due diligence, I just need to kind of chat about a reminder of what those mean. Whereas the formative, you know, is done before and during. It can be a pretest, midterm, you know, and it can be something they have to do, but doesn't really affect their grade in a high way. But it should provide feedback that lets you and them know how things are going. So for you, do you need to make adjustments in instruction because this particular group's having struggle maybe, or and it shows the students, are they focusing their efforts in the right place? Whereas the summative, it's more high stakes. And we always say it's done at the conclusion of instruction, which, the conclusion of that instruction can be a unit or a module. I dislike the term conclusion just because it sounds like all we mean is the big final or the big project, and we don't. But it does provide evidence that helps you judge their learning and, help you assign grades. So objective tests. And back to our conversation earlier about, the training schedule or the, learning community schedule's a little in flux at the moment because of COVID and just everything. We do plan to offer an alternative assessment workshop either in the coming semester, maybe the next one. So if you see something as we move through, when I get to alternative type conversations, then just know that, that there is lots more information coming your way if you want it and you think it's appealing. So I do want to talk about objective tests and what that means. I mean, we all know them. We've all taken them, done them, given them. They're tried and true. They can be formative or summative, and they can have the selected response or the constructed response. So these are the good, the bad, and the ugly. They're convenient because they're easy to administer, not talking logistics aside of the testing center or anything you have to do, but it's a test and it's easy to score. It allows you to focus on specific things. And so, like a good example is if correct spelling is an objective, which that sounds basic, but it might be very serious in something like midterm. An essay, while it seems like, well, they've got to write and they've got to spell, in that situation, they're going to choose words they can spell correctly. They're not going to pick the ones you want them to pick. So that's why you would maybe do a constructed response where they have to fill in the blank and they have to fill it in properly. Because even though they're writing in some of these, they're still focusing on simple cognitive processes like remembering, recalling, understanding. It allows for, a compartmentalization of learning, and it can require students to perform outside of context. So that's one of the drawbacks to kind of think about. And while objective is in the title, it still can be subjective from the standpoint of when it's created, there is some subjectivity there. So even though the scoring, it's answer C, and you're not going to say, I'm going to give them A because it's a nice kid. C is C, but when it was created, there could have been some subjectivity in the creation of that test. So just keep that in the back of your mind, that it's not as objective as we might always think. And so they're typically used to assess remembering and understanding, as we talked about. And if they're constructed properly, they can also assess some more complex cognitive processes, such as applying, analyzing, and evaluating. We'll talk about that. But writing test questions to do that, it requires a lot of time, and you got to do it a lot to be good at it, and you need to be relatively creative. So if you decide you want to go that route, just know that it's a good idea to have lots of quotes or data tables, charts or maps for those higher cognitive areas, because you're going to want students to look at that thing and interpret, draw conclusions, evaluate. A lot of times, say in economics or maybe political science, somewhere in there, there might be a chart that they have to interpret. And so an objective test would not necessarily preclude using that type. But they are most frequently and effectively used down at the remember and understand, which is when you see blue shading over these next few slides, that's what, that means it's the most effective or most common area used. And a little tip for assessing procedural knowledge, I do have it in the blue, and that's the ability to perform that skill like we talked about. These can assess like prereq knowledge, but they're generally not great at assessing the actual cognitive skill or the paper and pencil part of the procedure. You know, maybe a mathematical problem, you really want to show their work. If it's, you know, something in healthcare, they need to draw blood, they need to be able to kind of show that, and that's hard to do with this particular type of assessment. So essays, we're all familiar with those. These are pretty flexible, which is nice. They allow students to demonstrate their ability to actually understand, apply, analyze, all the way up to create, and they can vary in length. So this is why I was saying this could be a short paragraph. This could actually be something you do on even on a discussion board, as long as you make it very clear how you're assessing it. It doesn't have to be a 5-page essay with 1-inch margins, blah, blah, blah. You can still assess essay style in these shorter versions. So just know that they're descriptive and informative, persuasive, argumentative, maybe evaluative or critical. And they really are a good choice from the flexibility standpoint, because you can assess almost any type of knowledge or process with these. And they can be combined back into those objective tests. And that's as the short answer essay questions. It can be those big, manuscripts that we sometimes need students to turn in. And you want to use the essay when you need students to be deeply engaged in a subject. And you want them to apply those complex processes. So, because to write an essay, a student's got to evaluate some information. Hopefully they're analyzing some concept, and they're going to have to present it to you in a way that's hopefully creative, but if nothing else, logically. But when you use an essay, some things I want you to keep in mind. These are for students, but some of this is for you as well. So for the students, we need to be really clear about your expectations on how you're going to grade. And so you really can't probably use a checklist. You're really going to need a rubric. For your health and well-being, allow yourself plenty of time. These take a whole lot longer, and depending on your course load, it may not be scalable. So you may need to find a way to maybe not do a 10-page essay. Find other ways, but still use an essay type of assessment. Just I want you to take care of yourself. And then back to the student, do provide some meaningful feedback, so that especially if you're doing kind of the draft versus the final, so that they can make progress. And again, another way to kind of support that, not underestimating the time for grading, is you can incorporate them into the objective tests. Yes, does that create a situation where you still have to manually grade, or you have to, if it's face-to-face and it's on paper, does it take longer? It does, but it might be better than a big, long essay. So again, they can be used for a wide range, but they're most effective in that 3 to 6 in the factual and conceptual. And again, procedural is a possibility. Talked about that. I highlighted that in gray because although the performance of a skill is best assessed by direct observation, an essay can really demonstrate, the basic knowledge of the procedure, or when students, they can tell you how they would perform something or do something. And then there's concept maps. So concept maps are not necessarily what everybody thinks, like, oh, just those bubble think maps that are busy work. They can be used in a different way, because like essays, they're used in learning and assessment, and they've got a good zillion names, graphic organizers, blah, 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 mind maps. But they help a student visualize concepts and relationships, or they can help them show you that they actually get it. So they can vary in structure and purpose. You can use them to illustrate hierarchy, key concepts like a spider chart, a process, or even a decision tree. And they do give students a deeper understanding of everything. When they develop a concept map, they have to specify interrelationships between complex concepts. They need to use their complex critical thinking. Hopefully, it's going to stimulate some deeper understanding and some long-term memory of the concept. And we could use it to show so they can show that they can identify, classify, and organize. So, if they're seeing relationships and they can integrate new knowledge into existing cognitive structures, this is a good way to show that. They are a good choice for formative or summative, and really in any subject area. I know a lot of times people think, oh, it's better suited for the sciences, but not necessarily, because they allow the students to give you a literal picture of what they understand. So it could be as simple as how to, because, and this would have a little bit of leeway because everybody might have some steps that go different, but how they would research something and document. So you might, you have to be creative, but it could certainly happen. So, and the good thing is you can oftentimes use this and see a misconception that they've got, and you can correct that for them. A little assessment tip here. We don't all mentally structure concepts the same way. So unless there's a specific organizational relationship that they have to know, which is kind of what I was saying about like researching, like maybe they come up with the ideas first and they do this, or maybe they do some kind of random search. If there is leeway, allow them that. But if it's the heart's always the heart, and the lung's never going to pump the blood or whatever, certainly there's not a whole lot of flexibility there. But if you can allow for individual interpretation, then this is a good way to do it. Concept maps, like so much in life, there's the extremes, and then there's kind of a mash up in the middle. So they can be very directed, somewhat directed, or not directed at all. Use the directed ones when they need to understand those specific relationships or that specific organization that I was talking about. In an undirected one, that's when they can develop their own mental structures, and it's okay based on the content. And these, when you grade, you can use a rubric, but it could be a simplified rubric. It doesn't have to be that big, massive one. Or you can use a point system for each key element, so like a checklist. So in some ways, these could be a little bit easier to grade once you get used to them. And the good thing about concept maps is, depending on the type, they cover almost everything. They encourage that complex critical thinking and long-term memory, but they can be applied throughout. Like the directed, they're better down there in the 1 and 2, I mean, no doubt. The undirected are better up near the top. So those allow, students to kind of reconstruct some of those ideas and give it to you in their own way. So projects and performances. These are presentations of a skill or some type of creative work. So they're a really good way to kind of double up on learning and assessment at the same time, because they allow students to apply new knowledge and skills to this actual activity, and you can determine how well they're doing. So it can be used a variety of ways. A lot of times it's stuff you're already doing. People are like, oh, gee, many crickets. I do not have time to come up with this whole brand new alternative way to assess. You might already be making them do speeches or debates. They could produce a new show. A research paper is actually, it's a project or a performance. It's an assessment, but certainly, but it is this big project that they do. So I don't want you to look at this and think it's just something you don't have time to deal with. You may already be doing it. I do always tell like the healthcare folks, like clinicals, there's a prime example of a performance because they have to show. But across the board, across discipline, it could be as simple as you want them to be able to, instead of writing a persuasive essay, from one point, that's where the debate comes in. Or, you have them, show an argument by creating a PSA. So there's a lot you could do there. But, when do we do that again? So one thing, a tip for feedback is that, it's really crucial. It provides focus for them. If it's something that goes on like all semester, you probably need check-in points with students. So kind of keep that in mind too. It's not necessarily all of your time is taken up at the end on grading. If it's something going along and along, I would recommend check-in points so that you can guide them, because it helps them with their understanding of the creation and what they're doing and what they're learning versus just some final project that they throw on your desk and run away. And then grading, again, clear expectations. That ensures your validity and alignment. It should reflect those observable goals. And depending on the type of thing it is, you could actually get away with a checklist here, but you might need the rubric. So it's good for assessing a range of processes and knowledges, as you can see here, factual to procedural, understand to evaluate, some creation over there as well. But these are the ones that truly, they're the only ones that truly assess procedural knowledge. So if you're doing any sort of procedural item, consider this. And we are going to finish, not super early, guys. Sorry, I always try to get you out a little bit so you can get back to Friday living. But as I mentioned at the beginning, today was about the theory and the importance of aligning objectives and to your content in your assessments. Over the semester, and probably next semester, with the way things are, there will be times when you're able to come back together. Currently, I'm not sure if that's going to be through the Center for Teaching Excellence, if it's going to be through department chairs and deans, just within your colleges. But that's going to allow you to get together and talk about things. And so what I ask is you leave today, and after you get my my documents in the packet that I send you next week, is that think about just one lesson or module from a course that you teach, and review that, the objectives around it for measurability and observability, and then review your activities and assessments to see if they align using the table. And like I said, I will send you all of it so you don't have to go out to the Google Drive. You can. I'll even include that link in the email that I send everybody, but all that information I will send to you. And then the big overarching view of this series was that then you would get together one more time after you've implemented whatever changes were you discussed and worked together in that middle piece. And that's when you could talk about what went well and what didn't and kind of support one another. So somebody says, I did this and it was a bomb. Somebody else can say, well, I did it this way and it went really well. This might give you some ideas. And again, this is just my information. You do not have to write it down because you will be getting an email from me and it will have all the information in it. But just for those of you who need me, I'm in Wade Martin in Cindy's old suite, not in her nice, big, beautiful office, but I am in that suite. So I am there if you need me. Once we get back on campus, I think I'm phase 3, but I'm not positive. So if anybody's got any questions, I will hang around. Otherwise, y'all go live a beautiful Friday and don't think about work for the rest of the weekend if you can.
Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
And if anybody has questions later, you just respond to the email.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.